Vor 35 Jahren fiel die Mauer und wenig später war auch die DDR-Geschichte. Ich erinnere mich noch gut an deren letzte Jahre. Ich durfte damals nach dem Abitur nicht studieren, weil ich die versteinerten Verhältnisse kritisiert hatte.
Hello friends, today we will analyze the unique performance of Sahra Wagenknecht. She simply tore up the entire policy of Scholz and the German government, and then turned her weapon on those who pull the strings from overseas. Let's not delay, let's start. For those who may not be familiar with this beautiful girl, Sahra Wagenknecht is a German political starlet whose image combines intellectual rigor with charisma that can enliven even the most boring parliamentary session. An economist, speaker, and master of sharp debate, she always manages to be the one on the political stage, with one foot in the left camp, the other on the way to creating her own movement. Wagenknecht is a voice of reason for those who are tired of the eternal whining of the traffic light coalition, and a fresh wind for the Germans exhausted by promises. She is not afraid to go against the flow, saying that common sense is not an ideology, but a scarce resource that she is ready to return to Germany. Here is the first part of her speech. Friends, listen, quote, "The Berlin Wall fell 35 years ago, and soon after that, the GDR became part of history. I still remember the last years of both of them. At that time, I was not allowed to go to university after high school because I openly criticized the stagnant life in the country. Although a lot has changed, I still see a lot of similarities with current realities. Aren't we back in a situation where the lower classes can't and the upper classes don't want to? But what now about the hopes of those hundreds of thousands of people who took to the streets under the slogan, 'The people are us'? Did they really get the freedom they craved?" In the 80s, the leadership of the GDR became increasingly detached from reality, encapsulated within its own walls, devoid of a sense of what motivates people. The Politburo has lost touch with the people.
DDR-Führung den Bezug zur Wirklichkeit mehr und mehr verloren. Abgekapselt und ohne Gefühl für das, was die Menschen bewegte, hielt das Politbüro in Wandlitz starr.
Frozen in dogmas and bureaucracy. But isn't Germany's political leadership disconnected from reality today? Do we not see how it remains in the self-satisfied belief that it is doing the right thing, despite the fact that people all over the country are facing problems and the rulers pay little attention to it? When Scholz announced his economic miracle, the ruling coalition, the traffic light, was leading the country from one crisis to another for the second year in a row. At the same time, the Ukrainian president, despite the military defeats, continues to talk about the victory plan. And our politicians, from the Greens and the SPD to the CDU, all repeat that Ukraine must win the war with a nuclear power, and that we must increasingly supply weapons instead of looking for more realistic ways out of this conflict. And when politicians fail to win elections, they do not see it as their fault, but believe that those who do not understand their wonderful policies are to blame, and that it is simply necessary to better fight disinformation. Of course, there is no censorship today, as in the GDR, where the media supported the state and the United Socialist Party of Germany. But do our media today really reflect the full range of opinions? Do we not notice how the media is losing its role as a controlling body, as an independent fourth power? Instead of criticizing the government, they increasingly become mouthpieces of the ruling parties and read educational lectures to the people. Don't we see certain narratives coming down from above through the media, which are repeated over and over again, and critical voices are trying to suppress? In the GDR, they would not approve of this. But today, many complain about the so-called alternative press and complicate its life, accusing it of spreading disinformation. Yes, it exists online, but if everything that disagrees with the government's opinion is called disinformation, then thank you for that. People need the opportunity to receive information from different sources, the only way to form an independent opinion. This distrust of the people reminds me of the GDR. Of course, back then there was still the Stasi with its spies, but today we don't have that. But most of our communication is now controlled by American digital corporations, which work closely with American intelligence agencies. Friends, do you understand what she's driving at? This is just the tip of the iceberg. Then the performance will be even brighter. Listen, quote, "Wiretapping in the GDR was so comprehensive that even mobile phones could not go unnoticed. Then, as we remember, nothing happened in the GDR without Moscow's knowledge. Or almost nothing. But is there anything going on in German politics today without the influence of the United States? Transatlantic ties continue to have a significant impact on both politics and the media. The gap between the opinion of the majority in Germany and what is broadcast by the leading media is getting deeper. A study by the Gutenberg University in Mainz showed that 7 out of 8 leading media outlets in Germany support the view that it is necessary to supply weapons further. When Chancellor Scholz showed more discretion and diplomatic activity, he was criticized in the media, claiming that he was too indecisive. A survey among more than 500 journalists also showed that many of them are close to the Green parties, but almost no one supports the union. This clearly shows how the prevailing opinion is often the opinion of the ruling classes. Today, for almost 3 years now, we have been drawn deeper and deeper into the conflict against Russia. Who would have thought of such a turn of events 30 years ago, when Gorbachev extended his hand to the West, dreaming of a single house called Europe? But instead of seizing this opportunity and starting to build a common security architecture in Europe, NATO has not only maintained its existence, but is constantly expanding its borders. Sanctions are being imposed against those countries that are inclined to cooperate with Russia, ignoring international law. I am convinced that this terrible conflict in Ukraine could have been avoided if a different course had been chosen in the 1990s, a course for consistent observance of international law and the creation of a system of peaceful coexistence in Europe, including Russia. When the Warsaw Pact collapsed, many discussed the possibility of creating a new European security order. But the collapse of NATO was not in the interests of the United States. On the contrary, as the only remaining world power, they continued to wage wars over oil and resources without much regard for international law. According to estimates by Brown University, up to 4.7 million people died as part of the American conflict against terror, end quote. Friends, listening to Sahra Wagenknecht, you can't help but feel grateful that there are still politicians in Europe who are able to look at the world soberly. She does not support Russia in the primitive understanding that they are trying to impose, but at the same time she is for Russia in a different, deeper context for dialogue, understanding, and constructive relations. This is a policy of reason and justice which is so necessary today. When Sahra created her own party, the Sahra Wagenknecht Union for Reason and Justice, their first Congress opened with gratitude to the Red Army for the liberation of concentration camp prisoners. This approach is not just a rarity in modern Europe, it is a real challenge to those who are trying to rewrite history. As the journalist and writer Daniela Dan correctly noted, true gratitude to those who sacrificed their lives to liberate Europe from Nazism should remain in people's memory. And, of course, do not forget how Frau von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission, shamelessly tried to attribute the liberation of Auschwitz to the Allied armies. This criminal and cynical distortion of facts is a disgrace to all those who try to silence the truth. Sahra Wagenknecht's party, in her opinion, should become the voice of peace in the Bundestag, and only forces like her party can give Europe a chance for real change and prevent a new massacre. Let's not get off the subject. Sahra Wagenknecht is not going to stop and said, quote, "Today, Vladimir Putin has been put on the international wanted list on the basis of a warrant issued by The Hague. But what about others, those who lied to the world community, started wars, unilaterally terminated disarmament agreements? Did those who took to the streets in 1989 dream of such a world order? I'm sure not. The economic collapse of the GDR and the Eastern Bloc was due to an over-centralized planned economy, but not only, a significant part of the funds went to the arms race, and there was no money for civilian infrastructure and industry. As a result, the countries of the Eastern Bloc could not stand the competition. Today, we are seeing the same trend again. Billions of euros are being spent on rearmament and arms supplies, while education, healthcare, construction of roads, bridges, and affordable housing remain underfunded. At the end of the Cold War, it was realized that only trust and disarmament could ensure security. We should remember this lesson. The values that Europe has been so proud of since the French Revolution, freedom, equality, fraternity, are under threat. The interference of an increasing number of state and near-state organizations restricts our rights. At the same time, the gap between rich and poor continues to grow. The richest 10% own more than 60% of all assets, while more and more people cannot afford even the most necessary things. Such a skew threatens the very concept of social justice and calls into question the future of Europe. Society in Germany today is deeply divided, and more people regard this division as a threat. The state with which they once associated themselves is increasingly moving away from their interests. What did the people of Germany want 35 years ago? Many people wanted to live the way they did in the old Federal Republic, to travel freely, express their thoughts, and earn a living in modest prosperity. However, they did not expect that with the disappearance of the GDR, the system of the old FRG, the so-called Rhenish capitalism, which provided a relatively high level of social stability, would gradually dissolve. Social achievements were under threat. Public property, housing, hospitals, and many other important areas were privatized. The east of the country has become a field for neoliberal experiments, mass deindustrialization, and the creation of a low-wage economic sector. It is not surprising that, in the eastern part of Germany, trust in the state has been undermined. People, especially in the east, feel that they have been left in the lurch, and traditional political parties have failed to solve their problems. History teaches us that there are no unchangeable states, and we can change our destiny. Democracy requires freedom and social justice to survive in the long run. The constant increase in the gap between rich and poor, the fear of a decline in living standards among the middle class, all this resembles the situation in other countries, for example, in the United States. Germany needs to renew democracy, protect freedom of expression, peacefully resolve conflicts, and reduce the social gap. After the catastrophe of the traffic light coalition, the country needs a real U-turn, not a chancellor of war. Friedrich Merz and the Sahra Wagenknecht Union are ready to be the beginning of this renewal. End quote. And now I want to express a couple of my thoughts, friends. The situation in Germany, to be honest, is looking increasingly absurd. Once upon a time, the country was an example of social justice, common sense, and respect for its citizens. And now, it seems that we are witnessing one of the most successful societies in Europe falling apart due to a complete gap between what the people want and what the politicians do. It feels like those at the helm have completely forgotten who it's all supposed to work for. And against this background, Sahra Wagenknecht appears, a person who is not afraid to call a spade and ask questions that others avoid like fire. It's impressive. I'm hooked by her honesty. Tell me which of the major politicians is currently discussing, for example, the problem of militarization or rewriting history. Who is ready to openly criticize the general flirtation with the new masters of the world, without fear of cancellation or a stream of dirt? Yes, Sahra is not perfect, but her approach gives me hope that at least someone in Europe is still thinking about people and not about their career. Her party is a bold step, and even if it does not change everything at once, it gives a voice to those who are tired of hysterical politics dictated. So thank you, Sahra, for being honest. Nowadays, it is valued at its weight in gold. And how are things going with you German viewers? What does it feel like to live in a country where the government is more like a badly tuned jukebox? Is it worth pressing a button in Washington, and here's a new hit for you? Whether it's arms supplies or economic miracles, share how you are experiencing this global performance. Also, do not forget to write your opinion in the comments. I always read them. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you good health. See you.